The story of Lucifer's fall is one of the most well-known narratives within Christian tradition, painting a vivid picture of pride, rebellion, and the transformation of a once radiant being into the embodiment of darkness. While the Bible offers glimpses into the nature and role of Lucifer, much of this tale is woven from interpretations, traditional beliefs, and literary works that have explored the mystery of his transformation over centuries. This retelling draws from the most popular understanding of Lucifer's journey from being heaven's most glorious angel to becoming its greatest adversary. It is a blend of scripture-inspired imagery and literary imagination that seeks to capture the essence of this timeless story. His form radiated a splendor that even the other angels admired. His wings glistened as if woven with threads of pure light, and his presence filled heaven with an aura of serenity and grace. Positioned closest to God's throne, Lucifer had a role that none could question, a role that symbolized both trust and favor. For a time he was heaven's pride, a guardian of divine order, and a reflection of God's glory. Lucifer's relationship with God was one of unique closeness. He wasn't just another angel among many. He was anointed, set apart, given responsibilities that spoke of God's deep trust in him. The other angels looked up to him, not merely for his beauty, but for his wisdom and the authority that seemed to naturally flow from him. He was a symbol of perfection, and in him was seen the fullness of God's creativity and power. To be Lucifer was to embody all that was pure, radiant, and good. Yet, in the hidden recesses of his heart, a thought began to take shape, subtle at first, almost imperceptible, a quiet whisper of pride, a reflection on his own grandeur. He began to notice the admiration in the eyes of other angels, the reverence with which they treated him. And in these moments, a seed of pride took root as he pondered his own splendor with growing satisfaction. Over time, this pride started to cloud his thoughts. What had once been a pure appreciation for his role and his creator began to twist into something more dangerous. He began to question why he, the most beautiful and powerful angel, should serve another. Why should he bow before anyone, even God himself? Was he not, after all, the most magnificent being in heaven? This pride grew slowly, hidden under layers of duty and respect, yet ever present, like a shadow cast on a bright day. The more he dwelled on his own greatness, the more the thought consumed him, leading him down a path of inner conflict and turmoil that none in heaven could see. In secret, he began to consider the idea of challenging the established order. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying, a notion that defied everything heaven stood for. What if he didn't have to serve? What if he could rule? The temptation of power grew within him, feeding off his pride and transforming it into a desire for independence, even for dominance. He could see himself as a leader, no longer bound by commands, no longer a servant but a sovereign. The more he entertained these thoughts, the more they became a part of him, altering his perception and widening the distance between him and God. He kept these ideas buried, hidden from the eyes of others, and yet they changed him profoundly, pushing him further from the light that once defined him. Then came the moment he could no longer contain his intentions. He began to speak in hushed tones with other angels, ones he believed might understand his vision, his dream of a heaven where he reigned, free from the confines of servitude. Lucifer's words were persuasive, filled with the same brilliance and charm that had once drawn others to admire him. He spoke of freedom, of a new order where angels could choose their paths without restriction. Slowly, some began to listen, drawn by the allure of his promises and the subtle rebellion he represented. Lucifer's charisma was such that his words carried weight, planting seeds of doubt and curiosity among the heavenly hosts. He painted a picture of a different heaven, one where they could stand beside him as equals, unbound by the roles they were given. As he gathered followers, the tension in heaven began to mount. Although many were unaware of the coming storm, Lucifer's intentions remained hidden from the vast majority, yet the ones who joined him felt an exhilarating sense of purpose, of rebellion against the unchangeable order. They met in secret, whispering of a time when they would reveal themselves, of a day when heaven itself would tremble at their declaration of independence. And so, in the silence of heaven, where harmony had once reigned, a silent revolution was forming, led by the one who had once embodied perfection and obedience. As Lucifer's following grew, his confidence in his vision expanded. He was no longer merely an angel with doubts. He had become a leader, a figurehead for those who, like him, questioned their roles in the divine hierarchy. The whispers among his followers grew louder, and the energy among them became palpable, a charged anticipation for the change they believed was coming. Lucifer's speeches to his followers became bolder, his tone laced with the fervor of one who saw himself as a revolutionary. He spoke of freedom, of breaking away from the limitations placed upon them by God. In his eyes, this was not rebellion, but a necessary step towards true greatness, one that heaven's hosts deserved. The angels who aligned with Lucifer saw him as an inspiration. They too had begun to question the paths laid out for them, wondering why they were bound by divine commands without room for their own choices. Lucifer's vision gave them a new sense of purpose, a chance to reimagine their existence, and yet, even in their conviction, there lingered a quiet fear, a sense of stepping into the unknown. No angel had ever challenged God. The very thought of it seemed unfathomable. But Lucifer's charisma outweighed their doubts, his words washing over them like waves, sweeping them into his cause. He promised them a new heaven, one in which they could carve their own destinies, stand as rulers of their own realm, unchained from servitude. Meanwhile, in the heart of heaven, a shift was being sensed. Though most angels were unaware of Lucifer's growing faction, an unease had begun to permeate the air. God, in his omniscience, was fully aware of the thoughts and intentions brewing within Lucifer's heart. Yet, in his patience and mercy, he allowed these events to unfold, giving Lucifer and his followers every opportunity to reconsider their path. The silence from God, however, only emboldened Lucifer. To him, this was a sign that perhaps even God himself feared the power he could wield. Lucifer interpreted this silence as permission, a subtle indication that his challenge might succeed. And so the wheels of his plan continued to turn, moving heaven closer to an unprecedented conflict. As the day of confrontation drew nearer, Lucifer's confidence swelled to new heights. He could see himself at the center of a new realm, one he would create and shape according to his own desires. In his mind, he envisioned a kingdom free from obedience, a domain where he and his followers would be honored, celebrated, even worshipped. It was a thought that had once been foreign to him, but now it was his driving force. Pride, once a quiet whisper, now roared within him, propelling him forward. He felt invincible, certain that nothing could stand in the way of his ambition. Finally, the time came when Lucifer could no longer hide his intentions. The moment of revelation had arrived, and he stood before his followers, prepared to unveil his plan in full. With an aura of command, he addressed them, speaking of a new dawn, a realm where they would be free from servitude, where they could rise to their full potential without constraint. His followers, now many in number, looked upon him with awe and devotion, their hearts filled with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. They were ready to stand by him, even if it meant defying the very fabric of heaven itself. But as Lucifer stood there, poised to declare his rebellion, a presence descended upon them, a presence so overwhelming that even the proudest among them could not help but feel a tremor of fear. It was God, the Creator, the one whom they had all once revered without question. In that moment, every ounce of Lucifer's pride was tested. Here, in the face of absolute holiness and authority, Lucifer felt his own power waver, if only for a brief instant. The other angels fell silent, their eyes upon the one they had followed, awaiting his reaction. God's voice, both gentle and unyielding, spoke to Lucifer, calling him by his name, the name that had once symbolized light and beauty. In his words was a profound sadness, a sense of loss that transcended all comprehension. He questioned Lucifer, asking him why he had chosen this path, why he had turned from the light, why he had led so many others into darkness with him. It was not a voice of anger, but one of sorrow, a sorrow that penetrated even the hardened hearts of Lucifer's followers. In that instant, The gravity of their actions became clear, the full weight of their rebellion pressing upon them. Yet Lucifer, now too consumed by pride, could not turn back. He looked into the face of God and felt only defiance. This was the moment he had prepared for, the culmination of all his desires and ambitions. He would not submit, not even to the Creator. His response was filled with pride, as he proclaimed his intentions openly, declaring that he would no longer serve, that he would carve his own path, that he would rise even above the heavens if it meant achieving his vision. His followers, though shaken by the encounter, stood firm by his side, bound by their loyalty to the one they had chosen to follow. In that defining moment a line was drawn. Heaven itself seemed to hold its breath as the fate of its brightest star was sealed. Lucifer, once the most beautiful and cherished of all angels, was now the embodiment of rebellion. And as he turned his back on the light, he felt the fullness of his choice resonate within him, marking the end of his place in heaven and the beginning of a descent that would change the course of history forever. In the wake of Lucifer's declaration, heaven was plunged into a silence unlike any it had ever known. The brightness of the celestial realm seemed to dim, as though heaven itself mourned the loss of one of its own. The angels who had chosen to follow Lucifer stood by him, their expressions hardened by their loyalty and belief in his vision. But among them lingered an unmistakable sense of unease, a dawning realization that they had crossed a line from which there would be no return. Still, their commitment held, bound by the promises Lucifer had made to them, promises of freedom, of autonomy, of a realm where they would no longer be subject to anyone's command. God's voice, filled with a profound sorrow, echoed through the silence, addressing not only Lucifer, but also those who had chosen to stand by him. He offered them one last chance, a moment to reconsider, to step away from the path they had chosen. It was an invitation wrapped in love, a reminder of the bond they once shared, the peace and harmony that had filled their existence before pride and ambition had taken root. But Lucifer, driven now by an unshakable sense of purpose, rejected the offer. His heart, once filled with light and loyalty, had hardened, and he saw God's words not as mercy, but as an attempt to undermine his resolve. With a final proclamation, Lucifer turned his back on heaven, his followers mirroring his movement. In that moment, a transformation began to take place, a shift that would mark them forever. The light that had once filled Lucifer and his followers began to fade, replaced by a darkness that reflected the rebellion within their souls. Their once radiant forms took on a shadowed, twisted appearance, as if the beauty they had once embodied had been corrupted by the pride and defiance they now carried. They were no longer angels of light. They had become something else entirely, beings separated from the divine order, cast out from the presence of God. The descent from heaven was swift and irrevocable. As they fell, a sense of despair and anger took hold of Lucifer and his followers. They had chosen this path, yet the reality of their decision was more devastating than they could have imagined. The light, the harmony, the closeness to God that they had once taken for granted was now lost to them, replaced by a void that could not be filled. Lucifer, now fully aware of the magnitude of his choice, felt a rage begin to build within him, a rage directed at the Creator, at the realm he had once served, and at the angels who had not followed him. In this state of fury and anguish, Lucifer made a vow. If he could no longer be part of heaven, he would create his own domain, a realm that would stand in opposition to everything heaven represented. He would establish himself as a ruler, not under God, but against him. His followers, now bound to him by both loyalty and circumstance, shared in this vision, their hearts darkened by the same bitterness that consumed Lucifer. They were no longer angels. They had become fallen beings, entities defined not by light but by their rejection of it. As Lucifer and his followers descended further into the depths, a transformation took hold within him. No longer was he the radiant bearer of light. He had become something darker, something more fearsome. He took on a new name, one that would come to symbolize the very essence of opposition and rebellion: Satan. His followers, once angels of heaven, became known as demons, beings forever marked by their choice to defy the divine order. Together they formed a new kingdom, a realm forged in the shadows, a place where their rebellion would take root and grow. Satan's new domain was unlike heaven in every way. Where heaven was filled with light and harmony, his kingdom was a place of darkness and turmoil, reflecting the hatred and resentment that had taken hold of his heart. Yet even in this place his pride endured. He saw himself as a ruler, a sovereign over those who had followed him, and he began to establish his authority, shaping his new realm to mirror his own desires and ambitions. In his mind, this kingdom would stand as a testament to his defiance, a place that would challenge the authority of God and serve as a haven for all who chose to reject the divine order. But as the days passed, a sense of emptiness lingered within Satan's kingdom. His followers, once filled with admiration and loyalty, began to feel the weight of their choice. The freedom they had sought came at a price, one that grew more apparent with each passing moment. In place of the harmony they had once known, there was now a constant struggle for power, a tension that reflected the discord within their own hearts. Satan, though still their leader, felt this tension acutely, for he knew that his kingdom was built on defiance, a foundation that could never offer true peace. Despite this, Satan refused to relent. His pride had become his identity, his rebellion his purpose. He knew that to return to God was no longer an option, and so he embraced his new role with fervor, determined to oppose heaven in every way he could. He began to scheme, to devise ways to undermine the divine order, seeking out vulnerabilities in the world God had created. If he could not reign in heaven, he would attempt to corrupt God's creation, turning it against him, using humanity as a pawn in his eternal struggle against the Creator. And so the war between light and darkness was born, a conflict that would transcend time and space, touching every corner of existence. Satan, once the most beautiful and revered of all angels, had become the embodiment of opposition, a figure who would come to represent all that was defiant and destructive. His fall from grace had not only changed him, but had set in motion a struggle that would shape the destiny of countless souls. And though he had lost his place in heaven, his influence would echo through the ages, his rebellion a shadow that would forever haunt the world. As time unfolded, Satan's influence grew, casting a shadow over all that was pure and good. His resentment toward heaven and his desire to challenge God's authority became the driving forces behind his every action. He began to see humanity as the perfect target, a creation that, unlike the angels, was both innocent and vulnerable. Where the angels had been created in the direct light of God's glory, humans were formed from dust, bearing both divine breath and earthly frailty. To Satan, this made them ideal instruments in his rebellion, a way to twist God's creation and undermine his intentions. Satan's first encounter with humanity was one of subtlety and deception. He did not approach them with force or threats, but instead with whispers, planting seeds of doubt just as pride had first been planted in him. In the guise of a serpent, he entered the Garden of Eden, a place of innocence and beauty where Adam and Eve lived in harmony with God. Satan's approach was calculated, designed to exploit their trust and curiosity. He presented them with a simple question, one that echoed the very doubts that had led to his own fall. Did God really say? With these words, he planted a thought that would disrupt the perfect order God had intended for humanity. Eve, enticed by the serpent's words, began to question God's command, her curiosity piqued by the promise of knowledge and power. Satan played on her desires, suggesting that God was withholding something valuable, something that would elevate her and Adam to a status beyond their current state. In that moment, Satan's rebellion extended beyond heaven and into the realm of humankind. The first humans, deceived by his cunning, tasted the forbidden fruit, and with it they opened the door to a new reality, a world tainted by disobedience, one where sin would become an inescapable part of human existence. This act was the beginning of a ripple effect that would span generations. Humanity, once pure and in harmony with God, was now marred by the same rebellion that had driven Satan from heaven. Through his deception, he had succeeded in drawing them into his conflict, sowing seeds of distrust and defiance that would flourish throughout human history. Satan's hatred for God now had an outlet, a means to spread his influence across the earth, corrupting the hearts and minds of those created in God's image. He had found a way to perpetuate his rebellion, to transform his personal vendetta into a cosmic struggle that would continue through the ages. As Satan watched humanity's descent, he took pleasure in their suffering, in the discord and division that plagued them. His kingdom of darkness grew stronger, fed by the choices of those who, knowingly or unknowingly, embraced his influence. He became known by many names: tempter, deceiver, accuser, each title reflecting a different facet of his role in the world. No longer was he simply a fallen angel. He was now a force of opposition, a presence that lurked in the shadows, seeking to pull as many as possible away from the light. His aim was no longer merely to reign, but to see God's creation torn apart, to prove that his way, though darker, was just as powerful, just as enduring. Yet, despite his apparent success, there remained a lingering bitterness within Satan. He had achieved much, but he was still not the equal of God. He could corrupt, deceive, and destroy, but he could not create or command true loyalty. His followers, both human and fallen angel alike, served him out of fear, desperation, or their own twisted ambitions, but none loved him as he had once been loved in heaven. This reality gnawed at him, fueling his anger and driving him to ever greater acts of defiance. If he could not ascend to heaven again, he would do everything in his power to make heaven's influence on earth as faint as possible, drowning it in the shadows of his own making. As centuries passed, Satan's tactics evolved. He adapted to the changing tides of human history, exploiting every weakness, every flaw in the human heart. He stirred wars, incited hatred, and encouraged greed, planting himself in the hearts of rulers and the minds of the vulnerable alike. His influence could be felt in the darkness that crept into every corner of human life, in the injustices, the betrayals, and the countless acts of cruelty that seemed to arise without end. Each act of darkness was a reflection of his rebellion, a manifestation of the pride and defiance that had led to his fall. And with each soul he claimed, he felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, a reminder that his war against heaven was far from over. Yet in his relentless pursuit of destruction, there remained a truth that Satan could not escape, a truth that haunted him in the silence of his own kingdom. Despite all his power, despite all the souls he had led astray, he was still bound by his choice, still separated from the light that had once defined him. No amount of rebellion could erase the memory of what he had lost, the beauty and peace that had once been his. His pride would not allow him to admit it, but deep within, he knew that his kingdom of darkness was a poor substitute for the heaven he had forsaken. And so Satan's existence continued, an endless cycle of defiance and despair. He remained forever at odds with God, forever seeking to undo the work of the Creator, even as he knew that his efforts were ultimately in vain. His pride and anger had become his prison, chaining him to a path of destruction from which he could not escape. His followers, both fallen angels and corrupted souls, were trapped with him, caught in the web of rebellion that had begun with a single thought, a thought that had turned the most beautiful angel in heaven into the embodiment of evil. Satan's story is one of tragic irony. The very pride that had once set him apart, the beauty and brilliance that had made him heaven's brightest star, had become his undoing. His fall had led him to a place of darkness and isolation, a kingdom built on the ruins of his ambition. And yet he remained committed to his path, determined to oppose God until the end, even if it meant eternal separation from the light. His fate was sealed, not by the hand of God, but by his own choices, by the desire that had once seemed so noble and had now become his curse. Through his story, a reminder echoes across the ages, a testament to the dangers of pride, of ambition unchecked by humility. Lucifer, the most beautiful of all angels, had once been a beacon of light, a reflection of heaven's glory. Now, as Satan, he stands as a warning, a figure shrouded in darkness, his story forever marked by the fall that transformed him from heaven's pride to its greatest adversary.